Time. Isn't it exciting to be in person again? Yeah. It's nice, isn't it? Yeah. And I see a couple familiar faces and new faces. I'm so excited that you all decided to come out for our postponed Ed Talk. So we're not quite in July right now, but this is still going to be the community lecture that we have for July. For those of you who aren't familiar, my name is Natalie. I'm the programming coordinator at the Cranbrook History Center. And every month we try to have talks like this. They've been virtual for the last year, but hopefully, fingers crossed, we're going to slowly be getting to be in person in this fall. You know, as the months continue and we continue seeing good things with our vaccination rates, for example. But I wanted to start off this presentation with a short land acknowledgement. We're grateful, the Cranbrook History Center is grateful to be here living and learning in the traditional Tenakha territory. And we're so fortunate today to be able to welcome Jim Cameron to our stage. Jim is a local author. He has done so much research, so much of the wealth of knowledge that we have about Cranbrook's history is due to Jim's hard work, learning about the families, the buildings, and all the different pieces that make up historic Cranbrook. And we're so fortunate to have him here today. This summer is the 50th anniversary of the demolition of the beautiful post office that used to stand on Baker Street, and Jim is going to tell us all about that history today. So, without further ado, please let's welcome Jim.
Thank you. Good evening, ladies and gentlemen, and as Natalie said, it is a pleasure to be in front of real people. Again, it feels like forever since I looked out and seeing smiling faces, and even if you're masked, I just know you're smiling. I really appreciate those of you that delayed. It was my fault the talk was delayed for 3 weeks. I did a classic pratfall on some steel with some bolts sticking out, and I got stitches out about a week ago or so, and I got my nose back, which means I can put on glasses again. So all is well with the world here. Right, I have a quote up here. Darby's Castle, if you're not a Chris Christopherson fan, you wouldn't know the song. It's a nice song. It's really a love song. In this case, I thought it was, well, I don't know how appropriate it is. At 300 days for the timbers to be raised. Well, the post office, there weren't really any timbers. It was brick and concrete and steel. But the silhouette was seen for miles around. I don't know about miles. How many people here actually remember the Cranbrook post office? Yeah, that's great. And I'm sure, you know, if you saw it once, you tended to remember it. It was visible throughout Cranbrook, especially up on Baker Hill. You could see the tower, the clock tower from all over. The gables reached as high as eagles in the sky. Well, I don't know about eagles. There was a lot of birds nesting there over the years, so we'll go with that. And it only took one night to bring it down. Well, that's wrong because it really only took one day. So with that in mind, if we could, I'd like you to imagine, just briefly in your mind, Cranbrook without Cranbrook. And I'm going back in time here to about 1897, when Cranbrook had already been surveyed and plated, and all the markings were out, all the little holes for all the lots that we probably live on today. There wasn't much here. In fact, there was next to nothing here. There was the prairie, Joseph's Prairie, which today is the strip and all the environs thereabouts. There was Baker Hill, which was half trees and half stumps because they cut down a fair amount of lumber in preparation for what they thought might be a town. In fact, the only thing in December of 1897 that was in Cranbrook was the Cranbrook Hotel. And I don't mean the Cranbrook Hotel that's there today, and we'll talk a little about that as we go. The original Cranbrook Hotel, which was, well, maybe 1/3 the size, and really just a square hotel with a roof that came up on 4 sides and peaked in the middle. And it had been built in preparation of anybody coming to Cranbrook soon, they hoped. The people that were there running it anybody that came by, there were a lot of travelers. Cranbrook's always been a bit of a center point for traveling. You know, whether it was the Walla Walla Trail, the Dewey Trail, and the Highway 3. You know, Cranbrook's always right there. If you watch anybody go by in Cranbrook, if they're headed to Alberta, if they're headed down to the States, you'll see them. They come right through the town. There was no town, but there was a hotel. And people came by, riding by in the fall of 1897, and they laughed at the people there. The two hotel owners were basically standing there going, "Hey, would you like to stay the night?" They're like, "You fools, nice hotel." Because that's all you could see here. But you know, by 1898, it was obvious that the CPR, the Canadian Pacific Railway, was coming through Cranbrook. Not Fort Steele, as people thought. The depot was not going to be Wardner, as some people had hoped. Cranbrook. And by early 1898, by the spring of 1898, Cranbrook was starting to jump. There were buildings going up, there were houses going up, there were businesses, there were warehouses, there was 2 or 3 sawmills. If we could, Natalie, if you don't mind, and Natalie's very kindly agreed to take one problem off my hands and run the photos. What we're looking at here, and this, I've used similar photographs before, and I said, well, what you're looking at there is the well springs of Cranbrook. And if you're thinking, well, Cranbrook, how could Cranbrook spring from that? Well, in fact, there's a Cranbrook Hotel. So originally, with the flat prairies, if you imagine that hotel half the size with a peaked roof, that's what was here. But the next building that went up, as far as I can tell, and we'll talk about that a little too, the next building went up was directly across from it. And the building there is right now says Mattress Gallery. It's been, oh, I don't know, probably 10 or 15 different stores and businesses in the last 120 some odd years. It was built by a fellow by the name of Beatty, Robert Ethelred Beatty, R.E.Beatty, or Bob Beatty as he was called. He built it as a drugstore. But the thing that became quickly obvious as the town started to grow in 1898, the spring of 1898, and into the summer, was that a drugstore wasn't all that we needed a post office. So Bob Beatty kindly agreed to take half his store and open a post office, and he became postmaster, the first postmaster of the city, which may seem like right. Probably, if you're thinking a teeny little post office shoved in the back of the store with a few post office boxes, you'd be exactly right. But a post office even then was a big deal. It certainly was for the people that lived here. If you're thinking, well, I'll just get my information by any method other than post, you're wrong. Unless you knew somebody that rode through on a horse and told you it was happening in your hometown. There was no train. There were no planes. The boat stopped at Fort Steele. The mail came here. So the post office was your one and really only regular connection to the outside world. So it was a really treasured part of the community. It was a meeting place. It was the hardware store of its day for people that didn't spend a lot of time in hardware stores. Pick up your mail, go to Beatty's Drugs right next door, sit there and have a coffee, have a soda, chat. I have a picture of Bob Beatty. If we could just go back, if you don't mind, just for a sec. Thank you. The reason I show this picture, it's not he's a pretty good looking man. How old would you say he was? Any guesses?
35.
Hey, pretty good. He's 30 there. He's 30 and he's been in business in Cranbrook for 7 years. This is 1904 when this picture was taken. The reason I showed it is, what we should remember is the incredible youth of this community. It wasn't people that were in their 50s and 60s that came and started Cranbrook. It wasn't really people in their 30s and 40s very often. He would have been an old timer. They probably would have called him Old Bob Beatty at age 34. A lot of the people that built the houses, that built the stores and came here, the men and the women, they were in their early 20s. They left all parts of the world, from the US, from Europe, from Great Britain, from Australia, all over to come here on a real whim and a bit of a dare, because there was nothing here but them. Bob Beatty died. He was 50 when he died, in 1927, I believe. But the young people are the ones that built the town. And I want to talk about that just a little towards the end here when we talk about the post office final days. Yeah, if you don't mind, we'll go to the next shot here. So this is, and I'm just going to take a second here and do a little reading, if you don't mind, if these things stay up. Oh, this is well written, if I do say so myself. On the morning of Tuesday, August 23rd, 1898, with a hint of autumn in the air and the dust, there was a lot of dust, and the dust laid low by the heavy rains of the previous Sunday, the people of Cranbrook looked out of their newly built houses and stores, their lumber mills and hotels, their shops and their stables, and they saw smoke from the Canadian Pacific Railway track layer rising into the sky at the northern end of Joseph's Prairie. Slowly, relentlessly, the great iron horse crept closer as the workers laid length after length of glittering steel. At last, remarked the Cranbrook Herald newspaper, when the sun finally dipped behind the timber-covered hills to the southwest, the dying rays were reflected back from the steel rails that carried the first train into Cranbrook, a guarantee that the pack horse and the freight wagon would soon be relics of the past, and how rapidly the grand transformation was wrought. At sunrise, an open prairie and a grade. At sunset, a main track, several side tracks, trains of freight loaded to their full capacity, and a telegraph office a short distance away. So magically, really literally overnight, Cranbrook became a one-horse town, to a town with a telegraph office, to a town with a train that came through every day, to a town with roads coming in, to a town with not just one post office, but a second post office, because the first post office had become too small. So Rob Beatty decided that he would build a store further along Baker Street and move there with the post office in the back of that store. If we could go to the next shot, please. Here's the same shot just a little later, well, probably about 15 years later. And we can see Beatty Atchison. There was a number of Beattys. There was Beatty by himself. Then he joined up with Beatty Atchison. Atchison died in the first flu epidemic, which was a bit of a shock to the people that were buying their medications at the drugstore to help prevent the flu, I'm sure. Beatty hooked up right away with Murphy, and it became Beatty Murphy. And Murphy bailed out a few years later for whatever reasons, and Beatty hooked up with Atchison here. And then Beatty Noble. And the Beatty Noble name lasted about 50 years after the people that formed the company. We'll talk about that too. And excuse me, I just got to refer to my notes a little so I don't get too confused here. Yeah, let's do this. You know, when you're researching, and Natalie kindly said that I've done a lot of research. The reason I've done a lot of research is I could never figure out what was going on in Cranbrook. So you just have to do a lot to figure anything out. I got this far. A town site office sprang up, and this is 1890 onwards a little. A town site office sprang up on the site of the present-day Cranbrook Photo Building, and I think a lot of you know what Cranbrook Photo is. That was formerly, which was formerly Cranbrook Photo, was formerly the Canadian Bank of Commerce, but even earlier it was the second site of the Imperial Bank of Canada, the first site being the former site of the Drug and Book Company, which was where the first post office was situated across from the hotel until they moved the Cranbrook Hotel to build a second Cranbrook Hotel. Now the Cranbrook Drug and Book Company, that was Beatty's first store across from the Cranbrook Hotel, not only sold books, but they also rented them to preferred customers for a small fee. It was the first library in town. The library, the Imperial Bank, the Bank of Commerce, they all have something in common, and that's the post office. And it's quite ironic. And by the time we get to the end, I think you'll see the irony of all this. I hope you'll see the irony of all this. On the other hand, the first actual home of the Cranbrook Public Library was in the post office. No, not the post office in the back of the Drug and Book Company, which would soon become the Imperial Bank of Canada, until it moved across the street where the Landside office formerly stood, and later became the Canadian Imperial Bank of Commerce, after the Bank of Commerce sold their building to the Royal Bank. Sometime after the original Imperial Bank building, located by Beatty, was purchased by J.F. Scott for the home of Scott's Drugs, after Beatty joined forces with Atchison to create the Beatty Atchison Drug Store, further along rapidly growing Baker Street, not there. Rather, in a yet unconstructed real post office, which, folks, we are very, very close to discussing. Not the first post office, mind you, but that, rather, the fifth post office. Okay, it's just about there. The post office in the building purchased by McDonald Beatty Noble Drugs and demolished to make way for both a drugstore and the Canadian Imperial Bank of Commerce. So there's the irony of that, if you follow that at all. And it took me weeks to come to that concluding melange of history. I hope you all appreciate that.
Well done.
Hey, if we could go to the next shot, please. Here's the same shot today, but I've extended a little. So this is the original Beatty Atchison store, and I have no doubt under there is the original Beatty Atchison sign. Next to it is the Think, what was the Think Mercantile. That shows up just a little along here. Next to it was a building that was originally McDermott's liquor store, which the post office moved into for a short time. That's not to be confused with the government liquor store that was way down that block where the present-day Arts Council is, next to Sakura, where the post office moved into for a short time. Next to it, of course, on the very left is the Canadian Imperial Bank of Commerce, which was the site of the post office in question. And if you look carefully, I'm going to cast a shadow here, and if you look at the building, on the very corner of the building, they were kind enough when they rebuilt this place after the first place before it burned, that they put just a hint of a tower. On the corner of the building is just a hint of the clock tower that originally stood there, which we'll get to in a minute. What I have here is just a short bit from the Cranbrook Herald of February 13th, 1908. And it says Cranbrook's Federal Building. I'd like to remind you, if you've forgotten, the post office was never really properly called the post office. It was the Dominion. In fact, it was the Federal Dominion Building of Canada that had in it a post office. Nobody that I knew ever called it. I think one time when I was young, somebody said, I'll meet you at the Dominion Building, and I wandered around town probably for an hour. I ended up sitting at the post office because I didn't know where else to go. One of the biggest things that has happened to Cranbrook during its existence is the sale of the 3 lots on the corner opposite the Herald Building to the Dominion government for a federal building. Postmaster R.E. Beatty informs a representative of the Herald this week that a sale has been consummated with the federal government and that applications have been made not only for the purchase of the site, but for starting work on the building. The great increase in the postal service in Cranbrook and also the customs business is a reason for the government taking this action. You know, the editors of the day of the newspapers were huge Cranbrook boosters. You can't always believe everything they say. They told people that Kootenai Orchards was the best fruit growing area in BC. Now listen, you know, you can grow a few things in Kootenai Orchards, but not like you could say, Crescent comes to mind. They said that there was probably gold silver right where you were living. Just dig down, dig your garden, you're going to find it. But they did good things for the town. Cranbrook, he said, the editor in this case, is entitled to one of the best federal buildings in the province outside of the coast cities, a building that will be a credit to the community. Cranbrook is one of the best towns in the interior of BC. And I'll stand by that. And it is now, that was me that said that. And it is now time that the Dominion government should give Cranbrook the recognition that is coming to it as an important commercial center. This is now being done, and it is evidence of the fact that those in authority in Ottawa recognize that Cranbrook is entitled to federal facilities for the handling of mail and customs matters, and it is hoped that there will be no unnecessary delay in constructing a building of a size that will be a credit to Cranbrook and the district. So when he says it was a big deal, it was a big deal. And I don't think I probably have to spend much time telling you, and I mentioned at the beginning, for even a small little town, how important a post office was. Cranbrook's always been in serious competition, and always was, with Nelson. Whatever Nelson had, Cranbrook won. And Nelson usually got it first because they had a silver mine. Gee, we didn't. We had lumber. We tried to come up with the money to do things, but there was a lot of wood in Cranbrook, and there was a lot of silver in Nelson. And if you go look at the Nelson post office, it's still there, you'll see a pretty nice building. They were hoping in Cranbrook we were going to get that. Not quite, but on the other hand, not too far away. You know, the period, Cranbrook's had three main building periods, if we look back. You know, the first was 1898 to 1902, 1903. When the railroad first came, when the town was just booming. And it was a booming frontier town, make no doubt about it. If this was the year 1910, and we were here, we could walk right now to 6th Avenue across the street, and we'd be in the red light district. If we went to the 7th, we'd be in Chinatown. If we went to 8th, we'd be in the industrial area. If we went to 9th, we'd be, well, there's the pawnbrokers and the dry cleaners. If we went to 10th, we'd be in the nice part of town. If we went to 3rd or 4th Avenue, we'd be where the white-collar workers, the laborers lived. If we went to Baker Hill, well, even when I was a kid, it was Snob Hill. That's what my dad called it. Oh yeah, going up to your friends on Snob Hill. Unlike it's the Larsons, they live on 11th Avenue. Oh yeah, the big house? Oh, give it a rest. But there's some truth to that. Cranbrook did lay out like that. The town was surrounded by sawmills. Smoke like we have in the summer was pretty constant 3/4 of the year, depending on what other weather inversions you were living under. The next period was really right around 1908. And things picked up again for a number of reasons. Mining kicked in. You know, Cranbrook's always been center of a lot of mining, and we don't think of that. There's still, you know, every piece of property that you can imagine has a mining claim on it, probably your house. If you start digging and do find that gold, someone's going to be allowed to say, hey, thank you, save me the trouble, that's mine. That's the way it goes. In fact, 1908, I just had a few things. The studio, Masonic Lodge, from 1908 really to about 1912, and I'm just talking about larger buildings, not a lot of the really nice residences that we have right now. That's a period when they were built. 1908, there was the Masonic Lodge. 1910 was Central School. 1911 was City Hall. Moyer Hill, and that's the old Moyer Hill. It's no longer there because the city sold it for gravel. Their Agricultural Association Exhibition Building, which was really quite large. They had big horse stables. They had the Fall Fair exhibition for the whole Kootenays. They were all coming up. The Manual Training Center that's hooked onto the library now. You know, the city sewer was being put in place in 1911. Sewer was on the lips of every person in town if you talk to them, and that's probably not a good way to put that. Now that I think of it, when you're reading articles in the paper from 1911, toilets are mentioned frequently. And And until you found them that the sewers were going in, and everyone was talking about toilets, you're like, this was just not a very polite town. They just talked about toilets too much. 1920s, the early 1920s was really the last of the big building booms for what we would consider heritage buildings in town. We had to skip a period for the First World War. We had the Depression in 1929 through the 30s, Second World War. Get into after Second World War, was just where a whole lot of expansion took place, and Cranbrook's really continued to grow since then. May 25th, 1911. If we could go to the next photo, please. This is what the people saw for the first time that had no idea what the post office was going to look like. This is from the newspaper of the day. And it's a side of the post office that would face 10th Avenue. So just to the left would be an alleyway, and just past that would be High Country Sports and the Army Theater. The building will consist of a basement and 2 floors. The basement will contain a furnace room and a fuel storage room. I think steam heat was the heat of the day. The ground floor, save for the rear portion, is exclusively devoted to post office uses. The offices at the rear will be used as an examining warehouse and an office for the inspector of weights and measures. The main entrance to the post office will be at the corner of Baker Street, and you can see it there. That's one, and just on the other corner, the 2 doors going in, with another entrance, a secondary entrance on Baker Street also. The second floor is divided up between the Customs Department and the janitor's living quarter, soon to be called the caretaker rather than janitor. Provision is made for 1 large general customs office, a separate office for the collector of customs and inland revenue. The bedrooms, living room, kitchen, bathroom, and toilet are provided, 1911, what can I say, are provided in the janitor's quarters, the city sewer system being presently installed. So if any of you live in the old part of town, you now know how old those pipes are. Anyway, if you want to know how big a deal this was for the community, aside from a building like that, there were bigger buildings. In fact, on this side, from where you would be standing looking at that, and we'll see it in a minute, was the Norbury Hotel, or a property called the Hanson Block at the time. And it was quite large. Just to the right and across the street was the Wentworth Hotel, which is another 2-story building. Next to it was, at the time, the Imperial Bank, which is the site of what's now the Royal Bank. It was quite a nice area. This was originally those 3 lots. They've been empty since Cranbrook began. The 3 lots, the space there was really just a meeting place. That's where people hung out. I think there was a portable little lunch counter that was set up there every day, weather permitting, for 10 or 15 years. So it was a perfect spot to drop in a post office. It was just choice property. You know, I had a quick read of the people that were being hired locally. It was J.G. McCallum was the contractor's name, who had worked in Cranbrook and done a lot of work here. He'd moved on to Victoria and gotten called back for this project. He had a hardware store here right on Main Street where it said Mattress Gallery. If you go to the left of that, part of the bedroom conglomerate today was McCallum's hardware store. There were 4 hardware stores on that block. There you go. Looking for stonecutters, bricklayers, masons, carpenters, joiners, stair builders, plasterers, lathers, painters, glaziers, plumbers, steam fitters, sheet metal workers, electrical workers, all of whom were required to work a 9-hour day for wages between about $3.50 and $6 per day. I did some math, and it's really hard to gauge the value of money after 120 years. But you know, $6 a day would come up to about $169 a day now, which would give you about $18 an hour for $6 a day. So, you know, it's cheaper than, a lot cheaper to be paying professionals now, but at the day it was good money. Building laborers, drivers with horses, and drivers with horses and wagons worked 10-hour days. If you had a horse with 2, or you had a wagon with 2 horses, you got $10 a day. which was good money. All the work was done by horses, of course, back then, and I did read, I can see why they got paid more. I happened to read as I was doing this, I got a little sidetracked. Because of the sewers coming in, they were talking about all the cesspools that were previously in Cranbrook, just all over the place. One of them was across from what used to be called the Bell Building, which is now Rocky Mountain Printers. There was an empty lot there, and it was just a cesspool for the hill, and everything flowed down there. And I see where one of the wagons and two of the horses sank into it. They had to get another wagon to pull the wagon and the horses out. Which gives you an idea of the validity, not to get too sidetracked in the sewer system, but gives you a good idea of why we were happy about that in the day. So it was a huge undertaking, not just in size and in appearance, but a huge undertaking for the community. Work went on there for over a year. They did a really nice job on it. In 1911, the excavation work began. September, the cement foundations were completed for the cut stone. And if you haven't seen the building, it's really a very nice combination of brickwork and cut stone. And the stone is usually laid on top of the bricks. To form all kinds of nice little things above and below the windows. And you can see a little of that if you look at the Cranbrook photo building. It was a style that was popular in Cranbrook. The Royal Bank, originally the Imperial Bank, had the same design, and a number of smaller buildings, but they're almost all gone now. In October, things were delayed, but the granite and steel started to arrive. The granite was used inside. Beatty stepped down as postmaster after 13 years. In December, the Dominion government resident engineer William Henderson came to town for the official post office inspection, and he expressed complete satisfaction with the work, and this was important, the excellent quality of the locally manufactured brick, a product of the Cranbrook Brick Company. And I wonder if we could move on. Kind of an odd picture to throw out there. This is a little detective work for all you Hardy Boys and Nancy Drews out there. This is thanks in total part to David Humphrey, who's done a ton of work in research, and who I constantly call and say, Dave, I need help with this. He actually discovered the location of the original Cranbrook Brick Company, which had remained unknown for almost 100 years. Now, I've given you this, because that is the gateway to the road that leads to the Cranbrook Brick Company brickyard, which is right beyond the trees and a little to the left. And it's just some of the best Cranbrook mud and clay you're going to find. And if you've done any digging in Cranbrook, we know there's good mud and clay everywhere. But this is especially good. City Hall was being built just prior to this with the bricks from Cranbrook Brick Company. If you head out on the Mission Road, you just turn right at the new lights down at the end of the highway there, and you go just a tiny little ways in, I mean less than a kilometer, you'll see that gateway. And if you're out there, just have a look as you're driving by, you'll notice over to the left, you'll see the hills, and it's not like hoodoos, but you can see the clay sides of the hills. If you get a chance to go in there, it's private land, but I had the opportunity to go with Dave. And there's still pieces of brick lying all over the place. And it was just a neat excursion. And you know, I drove by that for years and wondered, why is that white gate there? And I don't know if that was the original gate. I kind of like to think so. Could be 120 years old. Well, 110 years old. The next year, the brickwork started again. They stopped for the winter. So it's been, it's been a year now. They've been working on it. They had to do some additions and alterations before it was even finished. They had to go back to the drawing board. It was too small. It wasn't quite right. In May, 90,000 pounds of cut stone arrived. The roof was well underway. The brickwork was completed. And it came to light that a clock was intended to be installed in the tower in due course. In June, the cement sidewalk was laid around two sides of the building, 10th Avenue, Baker Street. Huge deal. Cranbrook's first cement sidewalk, as far as I can find. First city sidewalk. Some people did their own cement sidewalks. There was a lot of wood sidewalks. And wood sidewalks are neat when they're out at Fort Steele and they're really well looked after. When they're not, you're walking and you fall through and they come up and hit you in the head and there's real problems. The whole town was just like, whoa, it set the town ahead about 10 years and they went, we can walk on cement. Let's do that for the rest of our lives. They did notice that a family of birds, that could be the eagles of which we spoke earlier, was nesting in the highest part of the tower because the clock wasn't there, just the open holes for the clock. And they were plastering inside by what have we got next here for photos? Yeah, let's go to it. Boom. There we go. That's what arose. And it took a year, well, not quite a year and a half, but close, before people could really imagine what it was. And I cheated a little bit here, folks. You know, funnily enough, there's not a lot of, they're probably out there, but I didn't have them. This is a later edition, this segment right here. So the original post office stopped here. You'll notice this, that's the bell. You know, now we have the digital chimes in the post office. Then it was a bell that was outside on the roof, that when the clock went around and it hit the hour, the bell would strike through some kind of magic that I don't have a clue how it worked, but Archie Raworth, well actually Cranbrook, Archie Raworth, who owned the building that was the post office and is now Delmont Jewelers. Raworth Jewelers, he was a jeweler, he would go up there regularly and change the time on the clock, do any fixing that had to be done. And I have two little articles here that I got a kick out of. The post office opened March 6th, 1913. So it ran, by December, I think they were starting to use it. The official opening, it was a federal government building. So that was a big deal in terms of openings, although there's not a lot written about it. Cranbrook always had problems with authority. So when the federal government came, everybody either laid low or just said nasty things to them. Not much difference. I do have this. This is October 17th, 1912. The main floor is probably the handsomest piece of architectural work in the interior. Haha, Nelson, eat your heart out. I mean, you can just see, eat your heart out, Nelson, written all over this. The greater part of which is devoted to the post office proper, providing abundant accommodation for general delivery. There is excellent light and ample provision for heat. Upon entering the building by either of the principal entrances, one is struck by the handsome woodwork and the artistic finish of those entrances. Back of the post office proper are several offices, including an office for the Department of Weights and Measures, a customs examining warehouse, and a large, well-appointed public lavatory. I would like to point out the last large, well-appointed public lavatory in the history of Cranbrook, as far as I know. All the offices are handsomely finished. On the second floor is located the General Customs offices, private office for the collector, offices of the Inland Revenue Department, lavatory for use of officials, and a very fine suite of rooms with commodious bathroom for the use of the janitor. In addition, there's a fine, large, airy, magnificent filing room. The basement is a large, and they're selling everything here. Come on, look at the filing room. It's airy, it's large. It's a great building. The basement is a large, well-lighted area containing two heating furnaces so set up that either can be disconnected at any time and the other be kept going. Either one of these furnaces is guaranteed. Now, understand too, furnaces in homes, this was new. There are a few homes around on the hill that have central heating, but it was still a big deal here too. So bathrooms, furnaces, okay. Either one of these furnaces is guaranteed to maintain a heating capacity of 70 degrees when the thermometer stands at 30 below zero. The building is provided with 3 ruby vaults, is fitted throughout with electric light. Cranbrook had electric light by what, 1902, 1903? So this wasn't too big a deal. the fittings being very handsome. Altogether, the new post office building is one entirely creditable to Cranbrook. Messrs. McCallum have carried out their contract in a characteristic manner. Everything of the best and no pains spared over the slightest detail to ensure efficient accommodation and artistic finish. It is worthy of note that the bricks used throughout this building are of local manufacture, and the Dominion government architect regards them as being of the very finest quality. You know, I didn't read anything that said, "Hi, my name's Joe Smith in Cranbrook here, and I am so proud of our new post office." I didn't see anything like that in the paper. I'm pretty sure it goes without saying that everybody was really incredibly proud of that building. You know, I want you to think back to Robert Beatty, age 30, 1904, postmaster in a tiny little store in the middle of nowhere for nobody. You know, he must have looked at that, and I can't imagine anything but getting a little teary-eyed and going, "We built this town." I get teary-eyed just thinking about Bob getting teary-eyed. The janitor was a caretaker. His name was Sam Files, F-Y-L-E-S. He was married. He had 3 kids while they were living in various places in the post office. Second floor, and then moved to the back, and then later they moved up into the attic and all around, depending on what was happening in the post office. He was caretaker for 30 years. Maybe we'll just have a look. Well, okay, no, I've got to do this. How are we doing now for time?
We're at 15 minutes until 8.
Okay, just about right. This was in the paper, November 1913. Rayworth Brothers have the bell in the post office tower working, and it tolls the hours night and day, and serves to remind the late sleeper in the early morning hours that it's time to be up and doing. The large clock in the tower is being made use of by the hurried citizen, and the banks report that merchants are meeting their drafts better since the new clock was installed. What it did, it gave everybody the right time. Now listen, we have cell phones today, which I find incredibly handy. I'll meet you at 6, boom, okay, you're late. You know, look, there's the proof. There's the proof. The whole town can see that clock. If you couldn't see it, you could hear it. We know that because Raworth Brothers, just a week later, have been trying out the striking of the new city clock as complaints were received that the bell could not be heard in all parts of the city. 2 new levers have been placed, and the clock is now striking much louder. Now that was great news, except for, and I'm not going to name them all, but within the 2 city blocks that were the Italian Hotel, the Venetia Hotel, the Allen Hotel, the Wentworth, the Bing, the York, well, the Canadian at the time, the Mount Baker shortly thereafter. The people sleeping there probably weren't as keen on the bell tolling all over the city at 4 in the morning. We know they weren't because they were continually complaining, you know, Baker, love the town, the bell is too loud. and the editors were constantly saying that glad you love the town, the bell's staying, you're just passing through, take care. Maybe we could look at, we'll go to the next photo. There's 4 really quite in a row here. So here's the beginning of what came to be called the financial district, mostly because of the Canadian Bank of Commerce, which is right about where the entrance to the Royal Bank is today, the side entrance. So here's the, what was McDermott's liquor store that was a post office. Here's the lunch counter, amongst other things. And there's the empty lots for the post office. There's the Canadian Hotel, which is the present day kind of York Hotel, unless it's called Shenanigans for the moment, we don't know. Next one. Same picture, slightly different angle, bank on the side, post office in place, Rayworth Jewelers, and next to the, across the street, the post office, the Norbury Hotel, which was originally called the Hanson Block for Nels Hanson, who built the Hanson Garage and the Hanson Block. The first Hanson Block was at the corner of 9th Avenue and Baker Street. Half of it's still there because it was the Cos Hotel. And that's still there as Shenanigans is no longer open. The other half burned down, Heiner's is there now. Lots of Hanson stuff in town. 8th Avenue is Hanson Avenue. The Norbury Hotel burned down in 1957, 1956. It could be a little just before I remember when it burned down. The Bank of Commerce became the Royal Bank. The Royal Bank knocked it down in 1967 to put up the present-day Royal Bank. Rainworth Jewelers was altered, if we go to the next photo, and became the building we know better today. Now Delamont Jewelers, there's a post office. Lovely shot, you know, with a mountain in the background, the post office. The old Overweighty store, oh nice. Cranbrook Mercantile. And finally, the last picture, which is present-day shop. So really all that remains from the old days are these two buildings, and that's the only really recognizable one. Hey, the mountain's still there, Mount Baker's still there. Mountain's still there. Yeah, next photo, please. This is one of my favorites because it doesn't just show the post office as a building. I think it just shows it a little more as part of the community. You know, the post office had, and this is an early picture, well, 1920, 29, I would say, 30. Lovely willow tree, and this willow tree here grew up quite tall. The driveway to load and unload went through this way to the alley. On the very left of the post office, you can see bushes. That was a post office garden. And Sam Files took great care of that garden. It was mostly flowers, it was some nice trees. Kids would always break in and steal his tulips and make them crazy. You can see the flags, the post office. Just seeing that photo reminds me of really what a center of downtown it was, just visually. You know, it was a lovely color, it was lovely kind of that red brick with the nice gray stone, the clock, the flags. You know, when it had the green, the garden and the trees. The one thing I did want to point out that some of you might remember is right here, down there, is the old mineral display. You know, I talked about Cranbrook as a mining community. In, I think, 1925, they decided, the Board of Trade, which would be present-day Chamber of Commerce, that they wanted to display all the minerals that could be found in the area, and there's a lot of them. So they got all the prospectors they could find to bring minerals, and they labeled them all, and they put them out. They had one of the local contractors build a really nice exhibition case there with glass in it. It was electrically lit at night. They labeled all the minerals. And it might sound kind of silly, but everybody that came through spent time looking at that mineral display. It just looked neat, and you'd look at it, all the shiny rocks. And even as a kid, I remember going to the bakery next door and sneaking out early so I could go look at the rocks. That stayed at the post office right to the end, that mineral display. The end, right, well, we're there pretty much, aren't we? Maybe the next photo, and we'll just stay there for a couple of minutes. You know, things change. Things always change. As George Harrison so aptly put it, all things must pass. They do it slowly. In 1925, the public library moved into the post office. It was the first time we had a library, and they got, I think, the really airy filing room on the second floor, which was great. We had a library. They stayed there for 20 years until the government kicked them out for what was known at the time as the Indian Agency, you know, which was just one facet of the government. I don't know if they have any equivalent nowadays. The library was stuck. They had nowhere to go for 10 years. They moved next door to the Fink Mercantile upstairs in a small room. But the juvenile section of the library was in Central School. That's how small everything. So if you wanted your adult books, you went to Fink's Mercantile, Baker Street. Then you took the kids a couple blocks over to Central School. They stayed like that for 10 years, I think, until 1956, when they moved into the courthouse across from Rotary Park. They were there forever until, well, we'll talk about that in a sec here. In 1966, home mail delivery began. You know, and in fact, until 1948, the only place in Cranbrook could mail a letter was in the post office. 1948, they came up with the idea of having drop boxes in the neighborhood, so you could go put your letter in there. Then they came up with, gee, you know, we have so many boxes, we don't have enough for all the people. Anybody here remember their old post office box? Yeah, I remember mine, and I was just a kid, it was 1496. And it had something to do with Columbus, and I can't tell you anymore. They decided we needed home mail delivery, 8 letter carriers for the town. In 1967, it was announced that the city of Cranbrook would have the right to purchase the post office. The government was selling it. They didn't want it. They had to offer it to the province first. The province didn't really have any use for it provincially. They wanted $144,000, which would be into the lower millions today. I didn't do a fact check on that, it's a little hard to trace, but I would say $2.5–3 million might be. Double check that. They released the drawings for the proposed federal government building, including the landscape and lighting. And if you want to know what that looked like, go to the present day post office across from Woody Park, check out the landscape. Oh. In fact, go mail a letter at night where they have their boxes and check out the lighting. It's still there. If you look up, they still have the lighting there. It just hasn't worked for 20 years. So that, you know, we have that. And I have nothing much to say about the new post office. If we were being attacked, I would go there. It's a good fortress. The town. It's a funny thing, you know, I was 15, I think, I was 15 in 1971, and so I didn't really give a hoot, to be honest, I'm sorry to say, about historic buildings. I mean, I loved history. My mom grew up in Lumberton, and we went out there all the time, and the Wild Horse, and looked for bottles, and checked for old cabins, and I knew everybody lived in old houses as far as I was concerned. Anything new was kind of strange. Whoa, the house was built in the 60s, that was weird. I have a niece and a nephew, well, a nephew and a niece-in-law, that were in town, and they were talking. They have a really nice house in Calgary. They're a little disappointed because they were looking for something from the 1960s and 70s. Because they love the way they look. And I was like, what? They have a really neat tooth story, but they no, that's cool. So things change. But in Cranbrook was going through a whole period of renewal. And I think and maybe we've all been guilty of this, cleaning out Grandma and Grandpa's house. Or maybe our folks. And getting rid of things that just don't want. They look old. They're outdated. They're too small. The stairs creak. The electrical is way out of date. The stones chip, the floors are cracked. It would cost an arm and a leg to redo it, wouldn't it? I mean, you're not just going to paint it. People try, they paint, it doesn't quite cut it. What do we do with it? The city said it's too small. People said, let's use it for a library. And there was a bit of a groundswell, not much. Let's use it for a library. The government, the townspeople, the city council said, no, we can't use it for a library. It's too small. It's too crowded. It's too noisy. There's nowhere to park. And nobody mentioned the library. Had been there for 20 years. There's nowhere to park. Now they were planning on, you know what they're planning on doing there? With those magic words, don't we? There's nowhere to park. One fellow had an idea. His name was Don McDonald, and he owned a building just down the street that used to be Beatty Drugs. And it was now McDonald Beatty Noble Drugs, and it had been for 10, 15 years. And it was a good business, and he was a good guy. The city didn't want it. They said, no, we don't want it. Mayor Klinkhammer said, anybody that buys that has a screw loose. I mean, why would you want to buy that? If you're buying it for the property, they're asking too much money. And if you're buying it for the building, you're just stupid. Don't do it. The city's not going to do that. We're not going to buy a building and then have to pay taxes or what. We're not going to do it. And then that was it. Don McDonald said, I'll buy it. I'll buy it. I want to put up a drugstore. I want to put up a 3-story drugstore, business block. And we'll call it McDonald's. And people went, that's great. And it was typical of the day. The design was just windows. You know the design. Like a big tower, only 3 stories, what can I say. And that was modern and it looked neat. And a lot of people said, that's great, get rid of this. Get rid of the stuff that we don't like. Get rid of grandpa and grandma's. Let's rip off the back porch. Let's get those windows out of there and put in some decent windows. Let's repaint it that color. We can't use those colors. Let's use orange, basically. Let's do it. In fact, you know what? This is such a pain. Look, everything's messed up. Let's just knock it down. And Don McDonald said, that's what we're going to do. We're going to knock it down. And some people wrote us out, really? Is that a good idea? And nobody said it wasn't. I don't think. I never heard about it. But I was 15, so it might have gone over my head. I do know on the morning of July 6, 1971, I got up. I was excited in a way. I thought, I want to see a big ball and come in there and that wrecking ball. I've never seen a wrecking ball in my life before. I see them on TV and how they bash things and things. And when you're the right age, if they had blown it up, I would have been more excited. I went down there, and I got down there, and it was kind of a coolish day. It's funny what I don't remember about it, but I do remember this. I remember standing on the corner across the street, I guess by where the credit union is, and watching the big ball and crane. And I heard it before I got there. I could hear the big boom. And, you know, I live a block and a half away, 2 blocks away, so the ground definitely shaking. It's that kind of like, whoa, something's going on. I got there and I stood, there was a lot of people, and I thought there'd be a lot of people. I was standing, you know, trying to get a good view there, next to old people, young people, kids, women, men, you name it, everybody was there watching the building go down. And it started to hit, and it started in the bottom, laughing, just relentlessly. And you could see things start to fall and crumble, and dust starting to fly, and stone chips going around. They had a fence around it, you know, quite a 8-foot plywood fence around the whole area. So you couldn't really see what was going on down lower, but you could see the tower. You could see this. You go to the next one. Yeah. I didn't see that. I left before that. I left probably an hour and a half before that. I was there for about half an hour. I do remember this. I was standing next to an older fellow, and by older, it was probably someone younger than me today. But he seemed old to me at the time. And everybody had a lot of the old guys, well, a lot of the guys generally wore hats back then. Fedoras were still in style. He had his hat off. And it wasn't a really hot day, but he had his hat off, and I looked at him, and he was crying. And it stung me, you know? It really did. A 15-year-old guy looking at this older fellow crying in public. And I went from this is going to be neat to whoa, this is, I'm not quite gathering what's going on. And I started looking around. And I think a lot of the crowd was just like me. They came to see an event, something get demolished. And I think what they saw get demolished was probably a way of life. That doesn't mean it was horribly bad. I don't think it was an evil thing to do. I think it was a wrong thing to do. And I think a lot of people, the next day, when someone said, hey, where are we going to meet? And he said, well, we'll meet at the park. Well, hey, where do you want me to pick you up after the movie? Well, I'll be on the steps of, I'll just wait in front of the theater. Hey, you're late. Yeah, well, I didn't know what time it was. You want to go get a drink? Yeah, we'll go to the fountain in Rotary Park, sure. How about the phone booth? Where's it? Well, it's not there. In fact, where's your house? Well, my house is, if you go to where the post office used to be, and you go up 2 blocks and 1 block over the because, you know, everyone started to realize that the 50 years the post office was there, it was our compass. That's where you said you were going to be. That's where you said you'd be. That's where you gauge where you live. I live 10 blocks from the post office. That's where I met my buddies to go on bike rides. Yeah, I'll meet you in front of the post office. That's where I sat on the steps and waited for my parents to come pick me up on my first date. Because they didn't want me walking the girl home because it was a ways, you know, it's probably 8 blocks further than where I live. But we'll come get you, just wait on the steps. That's where you went with the phone booth where in the old days you'd pick up the phone and tap the number. 1, 2, 3, 4. You didn't have to put dime in. It just rang. That was where really everything was centered. And it was gone. And there was a big hole. And there was a hole there for a couple of years. There was a hole in the ground. I know for a lot of the old folks that the people that worked so hard to make Cranbrook what they thought was beautiful, and they're proud, it was gone. The bank was gone, it was gone, the Norway Hotel was gone. What was there? Well, that's what was supposed to be there. And that might have been nice. You know, I look at buildings built in the 80s now, and I go, you know, that's kind of neat. At the time, I didn't like it. But I go, I can see where it's coming from, and it does fit in the old and the new. They can go together. What was actually there, next photo, was that. And you don't get a lot of shots because you know what? Surprisingly, no one was taking pictures of it. If you want a picture of Cranbrook from 1913 to 1971, downtown, find me one that doesn't have a post office in it. That's where they took their pictures. That's where he said, go in front of that building. Oh, it's great. Nah. That burned down. It's been replaced with the new bank. Well, it didn't really burn down. It burned so badly they replaced it, demolished it, and replaced it. And right on the corner there is where I mentioned there's the square. Because they paid a little allegiance to the old clock tower. For anybody that hasn't been in Cranbrook since 1985, it's a disaster when you see the clock tower where it is now. They just go, brrr. Did they move everything? You know, you have to explain to them, no, we put the clock tower across the street, which is a neat idea because we could use the clock again, which is great. The clock ended up out at Fort Steele. Nobody really wanted it. Cranbrook didn't want it. They said, we'll give it to Fort Steele. Fort Steele said, yeah, we'll put it in the basement. It was retrieved in the mid-80s when the Rotary Club decided to build the clock tower in Rotary Square, Clock Tower Square there. And Lord Delamont comes from the same building, the Rayworth Jewelry building, and he goes up in the clock tower and he adjusts that clock, although now it's mostly digital, but that's all right. I can still open I'll be reading a book late at night with the windows open in my house, and I hear, which I'm still analyzing, but I've been working on Robert Frost for a long time. It's called Nothing Gold Can Stay. It says, nature's first green is gold, her hardest hue to hold. Her early leaf's a flower, but only so an hour. Then leaf subsides to leaf, so Eden sank to grief. So dawn goes down today, nothing gold can stay. But it's been gold for me talking to you for an hour here. I've overrun my time a bit, but before I leave, I just wanted to say that thank you to the History Center, Natalie, our program director here. I say our because I'm in the building. Honor Need, of course, the head of the History Center, and I think today there was Emily and Eileen and Georgia that were all helping out. I really appreciate them. And you folks for coming out. Really special for me just to have someone to talk to that's like stuck in a chair in front of me. So that worked perfectly. So, thank you, ladies and gentlemen. Hope to see you all soon.
Well, we have gone over time. If you are willing to stay, if there are any questions, we could also disband and people could just go and talk with Jim after, if you so choose. Does anyone have a dying question that they wanted to ask Jim? Okay, we'll take one from Keith.
Great presentation, Jim, as usual. If somebody wants to see a duplicate of the Cranbrook post office, Greenwood post office, it's almost exactly.
I'm glad you said that, Keith. I was racking my brains. I was going through. I just plugged in post offices in BC, and I think I quit about the letter F.
It's a smaller scale.
Yeah, you're exactly right. The Greenwood post office is really small.
It's about a block up from the highway.
Yeah, just to the left up the highway. Good point. Yeah.
Just to finish things off, I want to thank everyone so much for coming here today and enjoying Jim's wonderful presentation. If you're not familiar with Jim as a writer, I would argue that he is as funny in writing as he is in person. A few less sewer jokes. Otherwise, I would say
depending on the volume.
I would highly recommend his two books, Cranbrook and Now, Volume 1, Volume 2. I think Volume 2 is in our bookshop, and you can get them also at the library, correct?
Yes, and now that I just wanted to add that I wanted to end with the nice photo montage that you did of a picture of the old photo of the post office superimposed on the president's site. I thought it was great.
It gives you a good perspective, doesn't it?
Yeah, nice job.
And for those who are interested in kind of placing yourselves in that history, we are running historic walking tours, totally inspired by the research that Jim has done over the years. We have a house history walking tour on Saturday mornings, leaving from the Cranbrook Farmers Market, and a Thursday evening downtown walking tour that we would love to see you all join us for and learn a little bit more about the buildings outside of the post office here in Cranbrook. So with that being said,
Now, is it the same tour on both days?
no, so the Saturday morning one is a house history tour. So we go through the snob neighborhood, as Jim likes to call it, and look at some of the historic houses, and then the downtown walking tour actually starts off right where Jim started talking outside of the Cranbrook Photo and the Cranbrook Hotel, and kind of weaves its way through ending at the Mount Baker Hotel, because we partnered with Soul Food for the walks. So yeah, if you want to check it out, we're going to send you an email for a survey. Thank you for coming out, and on the email and the survey, you'll see a little link for the welcome to the survey. So yeah, thanks you everyone for coming. A round of applause again for Jim for such wonderful.
You say yourself.